What is good, guys? It's Rey-Jay back with another video, and this one I'm going to be talking about is the one and only SPY, the Nasdaq, the QQQs, and the indices. Break down what the charts are telling us, what you should be watching for tomorrow. Why the market will either drop a little bit more than bounce, or even just bounce from here going into tomorrow and beyond. And before I break anything down about this, before I get into any more details, I do have to mention a couple of things before starting. Firstly, I'm not a financial planner. Make sure you take none of this as financial advice whatsoever. And also, if you guys can, please smash the like button if you want to see more videos like this. It not only benefits me, it benefits the entire community as a whole. And the last thing is, if you guys can, please check out the Webull link down below in the description. If you sign up for Webull, the link down below, and deposit any amount of money into the account, you're guaranteed up to 12 free stocks, each worth up to $3,000. The best part is, any could be a free Tesla share. It's a limited time offer. The offer ends in just 1 week. Check it out before they run out. With that out of the way, let's get on with the video. SPY is down 0.26% for the day today and did something very similar to what I predicted. I told you guys I'd be anticipating another pullback for the QQQ, for the overall market, for Tesla, and for SPY, and that is what ended up happening. But the real question is, could the market bounce from here, or is the market going to just continue to tank from this point on? I don't really know exactly how low we're going to go, or if we've already bottomed around this like 405.9 area. That it was quite a drop since I started making videos about the pullback, right? We were almost at 412. Now we're all the way down to about the 405s before we got a small bounce back to the 407s. But the question is, once again, will we drop more, or are we going to see a bounce very soon? I believe that I'm not too sure about how low we're going to go. I don't know if this is the bottom or if we're going to just drop a little bit more. And it is still possible for us to come down and try to fill this gap, whether we come all the way down to the very low 400s or not. In my opinion, it doesn't matter too much because either way, I do see a bounce coming next week. I see a very, very nice bounce. And I do believe that's most likely going to be the case once I show you guys the data and what the charts are looking like. But before I talk about that, I do want to note that we might see some downside early in the morning tomorrow. I'm just not as confident about whether or not we're going to break this low we made today. We still could, since the trend is still technically in favor of the bears. But either way, I just want to inform everyone right now. Yes, the market could pull back more. Yes, we might see this come down, but don't expect this thing to just crash and crash and crash. There's most likely going to be a big bounce coming by the time we get to next week. I'm going to show you exactly why. But once again, to start us off, going into not next week, tomorrow. Going into tomorrow, it's going to be the last trading day of the week because tomorrow is Thursday. We have Bullard speaking. We also have initial jobless claims. Then on Friday, the market is going to be closed due to Good Friday. But we still have some unemployment data coming out for Friday. But besides that, we do have some more very important things to discuss. For Wednesday, we have PMI, or at least we had PMI that came out today, this morning. It ended up being even lower than expected. That's very important because now it's showing us signs of the market contracting. We're actually starting to see big slowdowns left and right. For Thursday, we have initial jobless claims coming out. We want this to be hot. We want this to be high. That could be positive for the market in the very beginning. So who knows how we're going to open depends on jobless claims and also other factors. But I do believe 30 minutes into open, the market might slow down because we have Bullard speaking. He tends to be the most hawkish person in the Fed, and what he says will likely cause downside. Everyone has to be prepared for this. Excuse me, sorry guys. Everyone has to be prepared for this. It's going to be very important, and I do believe that Bullard is going to give us more insights about the current Fed policies. Now, when it comes to the options chain, please remember that we have this Friday, which is not Friday, I'm sorry, Thursday, which is tomorrow. Tomorrow we have about over 1.2 million puts expiring with about over 600 and almost 660 thousand calls expiring. The majority of positions expiring tomorrow are puts with a 1.76 put to call ratio. Could they try to squeeze shorts tomorrow? It is a possibility. I don't think it's going to be that extreme though. Max Payne's at 407.5. I'm thinking that what happens will depend heavily on different factors. If Bullard does cause us to come down, we could retest the lows that were made from today. And if the market continues to downtrend, once again, we could go a little bit lower. We could see SPY get all the way down to the 404s, maybe fill this gap down here if we don't hold gap support. If it fails at 404, watch this gap fill down here. But I do believe that this is going to be a very extreme level. And I think that SPY is going to get ready to bounce either way down there, or it could just bounce from like very close to where we were for the low of the day today, I do see a bounce coming basically between like 403 to 405, somewhere around there. We're going to likely bottom temporarily. And we're likely going to see the market try to bounce. I'm not too confident about the bigger bounce by the time we close tomorrow, but I do believe by next week we're going to see a much bigger bounce. I'm going to show you exactly why that is. Now, from an Elliott wave standpoint, we likely got wave one during the third week of March, and then we came down a little bit. Then last week, we got the big pump, a huge pump, and that's likely wave three. Wave four is likely this pullback right here. I don't know if we've bottomed already. If we're going to just come down a little bit, that's also very possible. We could drop a little bit more into the lower 400s. I'm just not as sure how low we're going to go. But just remember the 0.236 retracements around 404, very close to where we are. Somewhere here, we're going to likely bounce, and we're going to see the market get one more pump next week, in my opinion. I don't know exactly if we're going to break the high we made, but I do believe we should retest 411 at the very least, maybe even a little higher. It could go a little higher depending on how this looks. There is a possible head and shoulders developing on SPY right about here. Whoops, sorry about that, guys. Right about here. I do apologize about that. And the real question is this going to play out, or is the market going to end up making a very different move? In my opinion, we're most likely going to see the market continue to try to bounce as we approach earnings. And I don't know if we're going to break this high or not. If we fail to break it, then the right shoulder possibility is a possibility. It's very likely. But if it doesn't end up playing out, there is that possible inverse head and shoulders some people are talking about, which could break us all the way up to the highs we made previously. I'm just not too sure how high we're going to go if we're going to break this head level, or if we kind of like form three tops. We have like the first top here, the second top, then the third top. I just don't know for sure how high we're going to go. But I do believe, right, we're most likely going to see the market pull back. We've already pulled back quite a bit. I don't know if we're going to see SPY come all the way down to the low 400s or not. I'm not too sure about how low it's going to go. But I do believe very soon, whether it's at 405, 404, 403, maybe the 402, somewhere around there, the market's likely going to bounce. Then going into next week, we're going to see another rally and a retest of 411, maybe even a little higher. And once again, I'm saying this because you have to look at the options chain. SPY has a 3.2 put to call ratio next Friday. Lots of puts are likely going to be bought. It's not too crazy in the very beginning, but I do believe as we get closer to earnings, the market's going to likely try to get that bounce. This tends to not be the best of signs because of the fact that if we pump too much approaching earnings, we know that tends to have not the best of reactions. So looking at SPY, I'm going to be looking at these levels carefully. We might see this thing pull back a little bit, maybe get to 404, gap support, maybe a little lower, maybe it tries to fill this gap. But I believe we're likely going to respect this channel we've been stuck in for quite a while. For the last a month almost, we've been stuck in this channel. So even if it does drop, the lowest I could really see this thing going is around, way down here into like the very low 400s, like 402, 403. That is still kind of extreme. I don't know if it's going to go that low. I would say maybe around 404 or so. And then wherever it ends up dropping, we could get a retest of 50 EMA. We do tend to bounce off of it. So that's also around the 404s, the 405s. Then we see another bounce later on. And we see the market just continue to try to get back to 411 very soon. I think it's very likely, and based off this current setup, we're actually seeing the signal lines pretty flat. I'm not really seeing a divergence developing right here. We could be developing one in the process. We'll just have to wait and see how it looks. We did have a bearish divergence right here that developed, and that is what's causing the sell-off. It could continue to sell off a little more, and I'm going to be looking for a bounce going into next week. I think the bounce is going to start maybe, I don't know if it's going to start like tomorrow by the time we close by power hour, or if it's going to start by next week on Monday, but most likely it's going to come. So I want everyone to be prepared for that. For AMC, she's holding up a lot better. She closed above 4. She does have a gap below. I'm going to be looking at AMC to come down a little bit, trade a little bit sideways. And then eventually, as long as she holds this 3.77 zone, she could make a counter trend rally next week and try to slowly get into these like higher fours, like 4.2, 4.3, maybe approach 4.5, which is where we have this resistance. AMC might do that next week. I'm not saying tomorrow, I'm saying next week. But for tomorrow, once again, I do anticipate this thing to come down to fill the gap, trade a little bit sideways, not really do too much. For Neo, it's the same thing. This is what's interesting about Neo is it tends to be affected by the overall market. And Neo, it also has this like head and shoulders like formation that's developing, right? You could see Neo had this left shoulder, had the right, not the right, the head right here, and then we could be forming a right shoulder, right? What's interesting is for the right shoulder to form, Neo needs to like bounce and come all the way back up to the 9.5. So maybe that's going to happen next week. If that's the case, right, maybe we trade flat going into tomorrow. Neo doesn't do too much. It could come down a little bit, try to fill this gap and then bounce, but it could still form this right shoulder. And if it does form this, it could be dictated by the market, right? The HYG is starting to sell off. We're starting to see a lot of, smart money, if you want to use that term, is still selling. They're becoming more bearish. I believe that if the market does get that rally, the smart money are going to be using that as an opportunity to start shorting, and they're also going to be selling their shares for much better prices. Microsoft, we do have this gap down here on Microsoft, but it is holding support so far. It did hold the 50 EMA. I believe it might come down to fill this gap into the 280 area and then try to bounce. We might see something like that tomorrow. And the bounce, it's either going to start at the very end tomorrow or going into next week. We might see Microsoft try to get back above this 284 level and try to hold up for the time being. That does not mean the market's going to go to all-time highs or just rally extremely hard, but I do believe it's very possible the market makes an attempt, at least for the most part. For SPX, in my opinion, if it does end up breaking down, we could see this thing go a little bit lower, try to fill this first gap down here around the 4,040s. Then it might try to bounce after that. When could the bounce come? Either at the end of the day tomorrow or maybe going into next week. For the triple Q, this to me is still trying to respect this uptrend it's been stuck in for the past month. I'm thinking the QQQ might, it is possible it tries to come down to fill this gap down here around this like 313 area, maybe even the 310s, but it might bounce and try to actually see a counter trend rally next week thanks to earnings. I think the market's going to like earnings, and that could trigger a bit of a push up as we approach it. For the VIX, I just want to note that on the hourly, yes, I'd love to see the VIX explode and rally, but please remember the VIX has this gap down here around the 18.68 area. And the VIX is not looking extremely strong. It was trying to push up, it was struggling to get a big break and ended up actually slowing down again. It has another wick that formed. The VIX might try to push up tomorrow, then start to continue to downtrend. It might fill this gap down here. There's no guarantee that it's going to just keep rallying just yet. It's still showing some weakness. That's why I'm not as confident. I'm thinking maybe the VIX comes down temporarily, maybe for next week. Then we see the breakout a little bit after, maybe by the end of next week, if not going into like the third week of April. And then I do expect it to really break out by then, to get above 25 or so. And that's when the market's going to start reversing, right? So what this tells me is the stock market, it might get a counter trend bounce again next week. Then after next week, going into like the 17th, 18th, 19th of April, then the VIX is going to break out. Then the market starts coming down, right? Later on, it's going to take a little longer. Amazon did almost exactly what I predicted. I told you guys my target was around 105 and ended up getting rejected off 104.2. Very close. I told you Amazon would likely come down to fill this gap. I think the market is going to drop a little more to fill this gap. I think Amazon's going to come down to 100, but it could try to bounce off 100 again. We do have some very strong support there. And if it doesn't hold that, then there is strong support at 98, which is not that far. So it's either going to come down here and then bounce, or it drops a little bit more to about 98 and then it bounces. Most likely, it's going to come down and then try to bounce a little after. For what was it called? Tesla. Tesla's looking pretty decent right now. It's down 3.67%. However, it did hold this 183 area. We might see Tesla, we might see Tesla come a little bit lower, get very close to this like 180 zone, maybe a little lower, a little higher, very close to it, and then we might see Tesla try to bounce because Tesla is very oversold right now. I'm going to be watching this 183 to 180 area. I think Tesla might end up retesting this and then try to bounce. And we do have quite a few gaps up above. I think next week, Tesla's likely going to be back in the 190s, maybe try to get back to these even higher levels if the market really does get the rally I've been talking about. But I do believe Tesla is in the process of getting ready to base and maybe bounce very soon. Nvidia is down over 2%. It went to my level 264, very close to it. It looks like it wants to start to fill this gap so far. I'd be watching this thing trading sideways for the time being, and it might actually get a counter trend rally. Maybe tomorrow. I'm not too sure about tomorrow. I would say going into next week, trying to fill this gap. And might try to get back to 280 temporarily going into next week. Now, I'm not saying this will last forever. I'm saying that maybe this lasts another week, the whole market holding up. Then after that, after earnings really start to come out, then we might see the market really start to tank. As far as Apple goes, it did try to bounce off 161. We have some very important support down here around 160. I'm thinking Apple will either drop a little bit more, try to fill this gap around 161, almost, actually, it's 160.8. Maybe it comes to almost 160 and then this thing bounces. We do have this gap up here, so it might try to get back to 165. So I don't know if Apple's going to come down and then bounce, or if Apple just tries to go from here. Either way, I am anticipating a bounce is coming soon, either at the end tomorrow, the last hour of the day tomorrow, or going into next week. I think Apple might try to get a small bounce. AMD is looking relatively weak, not too great. It did try to base around this 91.36 area on the hourly time frame. There's not much else going on with it. It's just looking very weak compared to the markets. It might try to get a counter trend rally, but it needs to break above 93. Actually, it's around 92.9, almost 93. If it could hold that, it has the potential to try to get back to 95 maybe next week. But besides that, I'm not really seeing too much from it. It's still looking relatively weak, still on this big downtrend, still in this topping process. So even if it bounces, I do see it eventually going into the next couple of weeks, next few months, eventually coming down, continuing to downtrend. Google, it's looking okay. It's still holding up all right. I told you all to watch this 103 area. In my opinion, Google might come down to retest this 103, then try to bounce. And so far, it's actually holding up a lot better than the market. So now Google has some strength associated with it. Could it be forming? This was looking like an inverse head and shoulders. It almost looks like it. Maybe it comes down a little bit more, then we see this thing try to rally back to get to 107 or so next week. We might see Google continue to outperform the market. Going into next week, I wouldn't be surprised if it re-enters this channel between 105 and 107. Keep that on your radar. Finally, for Meta, so far, it's trying to hold the 210 area. I told you all that's the area I'm going to be watching. I think Meta looks to me like it might try to come down to this very important level. If it breaks 210, I'm going to be watching 208 or so. If it does retest this, we actually bounced off this like 208 zone not too long ago. So if it does hit this, we could try to see this thing bounce temporarily. But for the time being, it is still looking more distributive, and I do believe that Meta might come down to about 208 and then try to bounce. There could be some more downside coming first. For Netflix, I told you all that Netflix would likely, in my opinion, retest after it hit 350. We would likely see it get rejected and come all the way down. My target was way down here around this 335 area. It ended up actually holding 336. We did actually reach my target from yesterday around this like 350 area. That happened yesterday. And now Netflix is trying to get above 340. We have some resistance around this 342.6 area. I would say Netflix might actually drop a little bit more tomorrow. The trend is still in favor of the bears. We do have this gap way down here around this 332 area, so it might fill that gap and then try to bounce, or it might try to bounce off 335. One of those two will most likely be where this thing tries to bounce. We might see it stabilize there, but I do see it pulling back a little bit before trying to bounce. Don't forget, we have Bullard speaking tomorrow. Finally, the last two things I'm going to talk about would be the 10-year Treasury yield It's not looking too good. We're actually continuing to see this thing drop down. That's part of why the market's not crashing very hard. The yields are not actually doing too well, but it does have a lot of gaps above. So I'm going to be watching for a bounce, maybe around 32.5 or something. Once we get the bounce, that's going to be a little bit more bearish for the markets. I believe, like I said, the market could have more downside to come, but the market might bounce later on going into next week. Instead of telling you guys about the balance when it happens, I would rather just warn you in advance that the market's likely going to come down, then try to get a bounce either at the end of the week this week or by next week. I'm warning you in advance for that. Now, for the US dollar index, I just want to note that the dollar, in my opinion, it's starting to actually break up, but it's not doing too well. It's only up 0.31%, not a whole lot of volatility. If it does pump, we might see the dollar come right back up to about 102 to 102.25. If that happens, we might see the market pull back a little bit more. But then the dollar might reject off this area temporarily, trade sideways, and that's when the market might try to rally a little bit more going into next week. All right, guys, so that's basically what I have for this video. I thank each and every one of you so much for listening. Have a great day. I do apologize if I kind of stuttered a bit. I am trying to rush through this because I do have a lot going on for today. So I just want to get this as done with as fast as possible. I thank you if you're listening until the end. The market's at the moon since the long term is still very bright. And just remember, I'm not saying the market has to bounce hard tomorrow. I'm saying that we're likely going to come down. We may bounce tomorrow at the end of the day, but if it doesn't happen tomorrow, it's likely going to happen next week. I just want to inform you and warn you all about that as soon as possible. All right. Thank you for listening. Have a great day. Market to the moon and peace out.